Today is the 11th of January, 2012. My name is Wayne Clark. I'm with the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York. Today we are in Whitehall, New York at the Isaac Griswold Library. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and date and place of birth, please?
Yes, Gary Wayne Rod, born in Amsterdam, New York on 6/28/48.
Did you attend school in Amsterdam?
Yes, I graduated in 1966 from Woolridge, Lynch High School.
When you graduated from high school, did you go to work or did you go on to college or enter the service? Or?
I was in a delayed enlistment. I think I joined April of 1966, but then went in August. But I was working with Mohawk Carpets for a brief period of time, and then I got a state job.
Mm-hmm.
Because back then unemployment was rather high.
Mm-hmm.
I took a state job just to ensure that I had some kind of job to come back to after it was discharged.
Now, you enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Yes.
Why did you pick the Marine Corps?
Because I knew that that was going to get me to Vietnam. That was my sole intention.
Mm-hmm.
I bought into the evening news, the whole patriotic fervor kind of thing. I was really believing that I could go over and make a difference.
So you were anxious to go to Vietnam?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. Now, where did you attend basic training?
Caisson, and for boot camp, and then advanced infantry training in North Carolina. At camp, they call it Camp Stone Bay, which is outside of Camp Gregory, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. And how long was that school for?
Went in August and was finished by the time mid-December, because I came home for vacation, and then went to Vietnam from there. So technically, I was in boot camp in August, and I was in combat January.
How did your parents or family feel about your desire to go to Vietnam?
They were very much against it. As a matter of fact, I didn't tell them I was going to Vietnam until my last day of being on leave.
Oh.
Because it was, my father was really upset.
All right. Now, where did you report to once you left home from your leave time? Where did you have to report to?
I did Camp Pendleton.
Pendleton.
For a more, advanced infantry training prior to going to Vietnam.
Okay. And how long did that training last? Approximately.
About 2 weeks, because I was in Vietnam in January, mid-January.
And how did you get to Vietnam?
Flew over to Okinawa, stationed in Okinawa, or stayed over in Okinawa for 5 days prior to going into Vietnam. In the Marine Corps, you stopped off at Okinawa, dropped off all your civilian gear, because you had all of your gear with you. But you dropped off your civilian gear, and you took your combat gear with you into Vietnam. So the tough thing was about being in Okinawa was I was on a detail that we offloaded all the killed in action and wounded in action sea bags from the Marines who didn't make it back to Okinawa to go on leave or to go back home.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of an eye-opener that, oh my God, there's a lot of people getting killed and wounded here. I wasn't even there yet.
How long were you in Okinawa for?
5 days.
5 days.
Yep.
And when you went to Vietnam, how did you go? Was it a commercial flight or?
It was a commercial, Flying Tiger Airlines, as a matter of fact, brought me into Da Nang. And from Da Nang to Phu Bai, and then into Khe Sahn. And
now, how did you get up to Phu Bai from Da Nang? Was by helicopter?
No, by actually a small commercial jet.
Okay.
There was a Chinese guy, a Marine, Marine of Chinese heritage, and I were on a plane, and we're the only two military. It was all civilians going to Phu Bai.
Yep.
People don't realize there's life outside the war. And Fubai was, you know, well, the funny thing, when I got to Fubai, I was walking around looking for my regiment.
Right, because there was a Marine installation right there at the airport.
Correct, yeah. Actually, there's Marine installation at Da Nang, and then, well, not to get too far ahead, I was a replacement.
Mm-hmm.
I was just an individual that was given orders from Da Nang to report to Khe Sahn, or actually, to report to the 26th Marine Regiment in Fubai.
Yep.
So when I got to Fubai, I was walking around looking, nobody knew where the 26th Marines were, and I thought that this is really silly. And I got pulled over for having my ID tags on too tight by a sergeant. And he was reaming me out, and he says, "Who are you with?" Hippie, he called me hippie because I had my ID tags on short. And I said, well, I'm supposed to report to the Golf Company, 26 Marines. He says, they're at Caisson. I said, where's Caisson? I have no idea. So, you know, I had to be flown into Caisson. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine flew in the day before me, and he comes back and he doesn't have his rifle. He has nothing. He says, I'd leave everything behind. I said, what the heck are you talking about? He said, they're under fire. They're under siege over there. And so I'm going out the next day. I'm thinking, boy, this doesn't bode well for me. Mm-hmm. And we flew out in a C-123, very old cargo plane. And there's about 10 of us Marines in there.
Yep.
On top of the cargo, because there was no seating room. And as we're coming into Caisson, the plane all of a sudden takes a drop fast, you know, like drops straight down. And I thought we were shot. You know, the plane was being shot down. And there was a dog in with us. And the dog's flipping over with us. He's peeing over everybody. And we landed up next to the cargo net like that because that's what kept us from the pilot. And thinking, what the hell is happening here? Plane landed, taxied down the runway, and as he's taxiing down, they're telling us throw everything off the plane. So we're unloading all the cargo, and the plane, slowly turns around, starts gaining speed, and we're thinking, what's going to happen? They said jump, so we had to jump off the back of this plane because there's artillery rounds or mortar rounds are chasing the plane down the runway. So that was my introduction into Caisson. So I didn't have any time to worry about what it was going to be like.
Did you have a weapon at that point?
Yes. Thank God I didn't throw my weapon off first. That's what happened to my friend the day before. He said throw everything off, so he threw his combat gear and his weapon right off the plane. Mm-hmm. But they didn't even get a chance to jump off the plane. So I don't know if it was good or bad. We jumped off the plane.
All right. You're on the ground. What happened next?
Well, of course, nobody told us what to expect and all that, mm-hmm. So we're just looking to run for cover. And I remember diving into what I thought was a normal depth of a trench. Mm-hmm. They're normally 4 feet or something. These things were almost 9 feet deep, and I almost broke my neck diving in there because I didn't think it was that deep. But we just, when the attack ended, the mortar attack ended, then we just got up, walked around, collected our gear, and helped them, move the cargo off the runway. And then, my unit still wasn't at Caisson base. Oh, no, I was at Caisson base, mm-hmm. where the airstrip was, which is what I just experienced. Yep. My unit was out in the jungles, yeah. And it was out Hill 558. And so well, how do I get out there? And they said, well, we're going to have, it'll be a tank or truck truck convoy taking me out to my outpost. It was considered an outpost, as they called it. Mm-hmm. So I got out there a couple of days later.
Now, what was your first night like at Caisson? Were you rocketed or mortared?
No, I was given, because Marines are taught to use all kinds of equipment, and they gave me a machine gun position. And they said to me, if at all during the night, if you get any kind of incoming, we'll give you orders to start firing, and here's your field of fire. Mm-hmm. It was very specific, and nothing happened. It was very foggy that night, kind of scary.
Were you with somebody else?
Yes, there was some other replacements. but we didn't know each other. Nobody actually had any background with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So come morning, I hear voices. There's a road that I was overlooking with with my field of fire. And I heard laughing and talking, and I heard fires being, you could see fires being started. And I said to the sergeant, in charge of us, I said, "Who's over there? The enemy?" He said, "No, those are our allies, the South Vietnamese." He said, if we get any kind of incoming, they go with it. We shoot them as well as we do any enemy. So that was really, kind of tough to take.
Mm.
So, like I said, I was never given a break. From the day I hit Khe Sahn, it was just a mad sprint to the very end.
Now, what was it like when you got to your unit? How were you accepted as a replacement?
Well, I put down...
Besides being the new guy.
Yeah, well, and I actually was the only new guy. I mean, I didn't know what the experience out there was. All jungle grass and bamboo, and the grass could be that tall, 8 to 10 feet tall. So you never really got to see a clear view of anything. You're just always going through this dense grass. And I was brought out. I don't remember who came to see me. But the first thing they said to me, "Oh, you're here, you've got to break into being a radio man." I said, "I wasn't taught how to operate a radio." And they said, "Well, that's your assignment. Plus you're going to be a grenadier." Okay, I know what a grenadier is. You shoot grenades from a...
79.
Yep. So he said, "Well, you're going to learn it fast." I said, "Especially the radio man. He's leaving in a couple hours. He's catching his flight out." So I basically taught myself, and also would walk up and down the perimeter talking to other radio operators about, what do you do? So I taught myself quite a bit, felt quite proud of it.
Mm-hmm.
But also we ran early warning devices. There were wires that ran out to sensors, and we had a real crude form of radar. It was like a square box that you would just aim out into the perimeter, outside the perimeter, pick up different sounds, especially engine sounds is what we're really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I got those assignments, with only having a rifleman's MOS, military occupational standard. That's what I was trained to be, as a rifleman.
How long was it before you were sent outside the wire?
And it actually was, we could go outside the wire. We couldn't go on any more patrols. When I got there shortly after, they lost a platoon of men. Never heard shots or anything. So they said, "We can't afford to lose that many people in one clip." So they suspended all patrols. But we had what's called listening post, where we used to go outside our perimeter and lay down there at night, just stay real quiet and listen for enemy movement, which was rather scary.
Now, you were on a listening post, just you or somebody else?
No, it would be 3 or 4 of us would go out, and one would man the radio, and the rest would sleep, basically. It was just, you had a 2 hours on, and the rest you could sleep. So that's why I think they had 3 or 4 guys. But that was, you weren't allowed to shoot anything or anything like that, just to listen for movement.
And did you hear any movement out there?
No. It's amazing what's out in the grass at night. All these little birds running around. I mean, everything was scaring the hell out of you. Because you don't expect to hear, like snakes going through the grass and other small animals. So.
Did you have a starlight scope?
Yes. I think they were worthless, but we used to sit on, well, because I was a radio man, I had a bunker to myself. As a matter of fact, nobody wanted to be around a radio man because we were prime targets. Machine gunners and radio men were prime targets for the enemy. They'll lob either grenades or shoot mortar rounds or rockets at us. But I forget where I'm going with this, with the being out in the perimeter.
Yep. Listening post.
The listening post. But there was something else. Now my mind's going ahead of myself on this. But the listening, okay, listening posts, we would go out, every night, basically. And also we would go out on water runs, because we didn't have any, source of water within our perimeter. So we would go out to the river, I think it was the Perfume River, and, set up, perimeter, or, defense around there while guys were filling up these big 5-gallon containers, and we use everything we could. Empty rocket shells or canisters, mortar canisters, anything that could hold water, we'd fill that up with, and then come back.
Now, was that water purified at all?
No.
You guys didn't drink that, did you?
Yes, yes. We wondered why it was frothy. And some guys came down with dysentery.
Yeah.
And they started doing some investigation as, after this happened. They said, wait a minute, we've got to coordinate these water runs. This platoon was up on the river at this point in time. This platoon was down here at this time and that time. And they started thinking that we're drinking each other's bath water, which was why it was frothy. So, but I avoided getting dysentery at that time. But every day it was, well, I would volunteer. I only had a shirt, a pair of pants. Well, this is a little while into it, and being at Caisson, or Hill 558 and the Outpost. We couldn't get food, we couldn't get supplies, and of course clothing was not high on the list. So I ended up having no underwear, no socks, one shirt, one pair of pants, and I would volunteer to take the other radio operators turns to go outside the perimeter, just like because that way I could bathe every day. Didn't have soap, didn't have razors or anything like that, but just to keep clean. And needless to say, the other guys were happy that I would take their water runs, but they thought I was nuts, because just about every time you went out of the perimeter, you drew fire from the NBA. So it was a constant shooting back and forth.
Was it rifle fire you were getting mostly, or
machine gun? Because they had some pretty good. It's kind of complicated about the Marine outpost there. You had Caisson base itself with the airstrip, and then you had about 6 different outposts all around the base. So we're 558, and then there's 950, 1015, 861, and something to the south that I couldn't remember. So we were basically out there to offer protection from any assault by the NVA onto the base itself, which theoretically, we were like civs out there. We didn't stop any NVA movement. They moved at will.
Now, you mentioned you didn't have food. Were you talking about fresh food, or were you eating sea rations? Or
See, once in a while, jump ahead of yourself. They actually had a mess hall at the end of the runway. And I remember having 1 or 2 meals there before I was shipped out to my outpost. And shortly after I was shipped out there, one of the C-130s got shot. It got damaged, and it slid, took the mess tent right down, swept that all away, killed the mess sergeant and the crew in there. And that was the last of anybody getting fresh food. And from that point on, because we couldn't get out at the outpost, we couldn't get supplied that easily because of either fog, the weather, or the enemy was shooting at our planes, the helicopters. And the helicopters would think, okay, that's too dangerous, we'll come back at another time. Because every time we were to get supplied, they called it the flying circus. It was the big choppers, the
CH-46?
Yes,
Sea Knights or Chinooks?
Chinooks is what they call them, that's right. They would be way up in the air, circling around. And of course, the jets would come in and strafe the area and bomb and napalm it. Then one by one, the choppers would start to come down and drop off in a pre-designated area, our supplies. And so, because it started getting so tight in the weather, we were getting into monsoon, that you could only get 2 sea ration meals a day. And one of the biggest problems they had was kind of a breakdown of discipline. Guys used to do low crawls into the supply area and low crawl back out with a case of sea rations on their back, because we were very hungry. I mean, there was no overweight Marines in that perimeter.
Were you involved in any of the heavy combat, with direct combat with the NVA?
At the time I was wounded. That's what ended my April. Well, I have it as April 6th. They have it as April 7th, and I think it's because of the date, the date change. But it was Palm Sunday was when I was wounded. We were to be the first company out of the perimeter to test, the NVA's, strengths out there. And so it was Good Friday. The French priest. As a matter of, to give you an idea of what we had out there. Even though we were a combat base, airstrip, and all the outposts, there was a French coffee plantation in that area, and they had a little French community. And a priest came up and gave us services. That was on Holy Friday. And then Saturday was our first venture outside the perimeter. And we took in quite a few casualties that first day, because we didn't know what we were running into. And it was we didn't know if it was a company or a battalion or a regiment of NVA upon.
Now, what size unit did you go out with?
We went out with a company.
Okay.
Which is very unusual. But when you look back, the person who made the decision to send us out must have realized that the NVA was very much aware of the size unit that was going out there. If you're sending a company out, you're not out scouting. We're looking to attack somebody. So they were very well entrenched and very, I mean, we did in broad daylight. So by the time we hit the top of the hill, and I was very lucky, we were leapfrogging platoon platoon at a time up through. And my unit was next to go up over the top. They said, well, you guys hold it here. And then the next platoon will come through you and set in at the top of the hill. Well, as soon as they came through us, all hell broke loose. That's when their machine gunner, the NVA opened fire on our troops with machine gunners, and we lost quite a few Marines in that platoon. And we realized that we didn't have enough to continue with the assault. So we set in, and to keep the NVA from now counterattacking and coming through us, we had jets coming in providing napalm and bombing runs to get the NVA away from us so we could retreat back off the hill. So the first day of fighting we lost, I don't know, there wasn't much left of that platoon. I know they had to leave 5 Marines back. They must have been killed because we didn't have enough help to retrieve their bodies. So we're just focused on getting the wounded off the mountain, choppered off the mountain, medevac. And so then they shipped, we had to withdraw from the mountain, went back to our perimeter. You kind of thought there'd be somebody around to give you some hot food and stuff, and there was nothing. So we had to make do with whatever we had, because we had to go back out the following morning. We had to leave our perimeter at 4 o'clock to re-assault that hill. And then they had brought we were a golf company, and they had brought Foxtrot Company from 861. It's kind of funny, we're 558. We had a company of Marines on 861, and the NVA were on 861 Alpha. So, and they were there all that whole time. We just could never dislodge them with, with a shrapnel, and I'm talking serious bombing runs. Just never disengage those guys. So the second day, we're working through. It was very hot. We were starting to lose people through heat exhaustion, heat stroke. So by the time we got up to get online for our charge, out of 33 Marines in my platoon, there was only 13 of us left. and they gave the order, we got to charge. Because
Now, let me just interrupt you for a
Sure.
second. Were you carrying a full combat field pack?
Well, I was carrying a radio pack,
Mhm.
extra mortar rounds and extra machine gun rounds.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to my own, I always carried 400 rounds of ammunition on me, and so I was pretty heavily weighed down. But, so that when we got online to charge, the NVA was not only shooting, engaging us, but Foxtrot was coming across the ridge line from 861 to 861 Alpha. Again, the enemy was on 861 Alpha, they're 861, so they're coming across a ridge line. The NVA were mortaring behind them, and they had been ambushed on both sides of the ridge line.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, you've got to make a move. You've got to knock out that machine gun and mortar position that's wreaking havoc on Foxtrot. So obviously we didn't make it. I was shot 3 times with a machine gun, but thank God only 1 round went through. The other 2, I had a doubled over flak jacket. I was real skinny back in those days, and I had an extra large flak jacket, and I had to tie it to me because it was so big it would flop all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to complain all the time about that flak jacket. I didn't know that it was going to save my life, because the second round actually broke my M16 right in half, and then the third round, of course, got me.
So you took 2 rounds to the stomach.
Yeah, I had broken ribs where they hit,
Mm-hmm.
but no penetration, thank God. Just big, giant bruises.
Mm-hmm.
But the third round, what's ironic is that it was an armor-piercing round, and I had, of course, my radio pack on, and you had your big buckles coming over the shoulder. It hit the buckle, blew the buckle through me and out my scapula,
Oh, jeez.
and I have the complete bullet here that they took out of me. But that was, that hurt. And I thought that was all. I had no idea that I was shot. It was just, there was like smoke and then blood was spurting. I'm thinking, well, I must have got grazed by something. And, the machine gun and gunfire was just unbelievable. So I'm crawling around looking for some place to go. And I see this fighting hole.
And your weapon was useless,
It was
right?
totally useless. I got all this ammo on me and no way to protect myself. And as a radio operator, you're supposed to have a sidearm, a .45 caliber, but they couldn't equip us with any of that kind of stuff. So I crawled over the fighting hole, and I remembered in our training, don't go into fighting holes because they're booby-trapped. But I looked and I saw this NATO color, the NATO blue grenade land. It was like the old pineapple thing, and I'm thinking, wait, it looks just like a training grenade. And when these things are happening, of course I'm kind of like loopy from being shot. Then this grenade lands about 10 feet from me, and I'm looking, thinking, gee, it's not smoking, because I'm thinking like a training grenade, the smoke coming out, it just pops and fizzes. And I said, I better not take any chance. And as soon as I dropped down, and I thought I looked at the grenade, and it exploded. And of course, it got me all across my lower right back and through my right leg, this arm, and my cheek, and some other parts that they all cauterized.
Mm-hmm. So it was a Chi-Com grenade?
No, it was I think it would have been a NATO grenade from World War II, or not from World War II, but like in the 50s.
Okay.
But it was NATO blue. Then, of course, I found out the NVA had a lot of NATO equipment that they got from other encounters. And probably the machine gun I was shot with was probably a NATO issue. Because they got them from the Chinese, or however they came about them. But they didn't use us all communist-made weapons. So when that grenade went off, I thought that was the end of me. But they finally got me out of there. I maintained radio contact when I was in there, in the hole, and kept hearing these gigantic explosions all around me. And I thought they were the enemy, using some kind of big guns or whatever. There was our recoilless rifle in our position that was trying to drive the NVA back. Of course, they had no idea where any of us were, because you couldn't see us and visually spot us. And I remember the telling, the serious situation I was in when my battalion radio operator called out And I responded, and he says to me, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm up here with the rest of the guys." He says, "You got to get out of there. There's nobody left." So I couldn't get out. I only could use my left arm. And so after a while, I was bleeding so bad here, and it was very upsetting because I'm thinking, I got to stop this bleeding somehow. I just kept putting dirt in there, packing in, because what I don't see is not going to bother me. I had no idea this bleeding is bad out the back. But when we finally got, reinforcements coming, that's how I was saved. And one other funny thing, how you always fight against certain things. I fought against having my antenna stick up. I had the whip antenna. Oh, the first day of fighting, my lieutenant had dysentery. My lieutenant was very nervous about going out, so the first day he didn't come with us. And that lieutenant allowed me to have a tape antenna, so I wouldn't be advertising that I'm a radio man. Well, my lieutenant the second day says, "You're carrying a whip antenna." And I remember saying to him, "Well, you might as well put a flag on it too. Why not advertise more that I'm a radio man?" But what's ironic is if I didn't have that whip antenna sticking out of the hole, they probably would have never found me. So it was the weird combination of a flak jacket being doubled over because it was too big. That saved my life, and the whip antenna sticking up out of the hole.
Did you lose consciousness at all?
No. As a matter of fact, after they, carried me out of there, and they stripped you naked. They threw me on a helicopter, just totally naked. And they put an A on my forehead for being alive. They put either A or D, so they can, act quickly when they're offloading the bodies. And I remember being in the bottom of that chopper thinking, I can't pass out, because I don't take a chance that they might decide, well, he's dead. And so I just didn't want to be thrown in the dead pile. So, no, I stayed conscious the whole time. Very painful. That it would have been easy to, slip into. As a matter of fact, I don't know how I didn't go into shock. But I did neither of those. So I stayed awake until they took me into the operating room.
So did they bring you directly to Khe Sahn?
Yes, what happened is when they flew me down to the combat base hospital there, and I mean, I was like in unbelievable pain. I couldn't believe anything like that. The grenade caused more pain than the bullet. And but I was flipping around thinking, oh my God, give me something for pain. This is really hurting. And they said to me, we can't because of the shrapnel wounds to your spine. They didn't know if it went into my organs or whatnot, so they couldn't give me any pain. I mean, that was their rationale.
Did you have feeling in your legs? And
no, I thought I lost my legs. They were still there, but the concussion from that grenade going off caused some paralysis for however long, I can't remember. But there's a guy in a stretcher next to me, and they were giving him last rites. His stomach was all blown apart. And I'm saying to myself, I think I'm going to live. This guy obviously isn't. So that kind of calmed me down and say, just deal with it, deal with the pain. Sooner or later, you're going to be operated on. So they choppered me out of there to a hospital in Phu, and that's where they did the operation.
How long were you in Phu for?
Quite a short period of time, because I remember it may have been a couple days. Oh, an interesting thing, when they were putting me on the chopper, it was a bit, it wasn't the little, I was never very good with the smaller, it was a Korean vintage chopper, like a little medevac chopper. They threw us all in there. There was no stretch, you weren't put on a stretcher, you just thrown in naked or whatever else was in there. And so they put me on a stretcher to be taken up to Phu to be operated on. And they were stacking us like in the side of the chopper, like we were cordwood. Because they're just trying to get as many people on the chopper to get them out of there. And I remember as they put me in there, and the helicopter's taken off. The door slides open, and the machine gunner starts shooting. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get killed right here in the stretcher. But that's when I did pass out on the chopper. And when I came to, it was like something, I don't know, real weird movie. I heard some sucking sound to the right of me, and I look, and there's a Vietnamese person. I'm in a hospital ward. The Vietnamese person, a guy to my right, on some kind of a ventilator, something, but a real loud sucking sound that was causing him to bend, and with each contraction or whatever. And I looked to the left of me, and here's this Vietnamese woman naked from the waist up on the bed next to me, and I'm thinking, I got shot. I'm in an NVA hospital. I was like, my heart's racing like crazy. Thing, what the hell is going on here? And then I see this corpsman walking towards me with a wash bowl and washcloth. And I looked at him and said, I think you're American, but am I in an NVA hospital? He says, no, you're in the overflow wing. Yeah, at Fubai. And he said, there are a lot of civilian casualties that are going out at the same time as there were military casualties. So they just didn't have enough room in the military ward to put me until a couple days later. But then I was flown down to Cam Ranh Bay Hospital, a big Air Force base. And that's where I spent a month before my condition went worse, and then they sent me home to be closer in case I was going to die from the infections.
Now, you said your condition got worse. What happened?
Yeah, well, part of this may or may not have been a contributing factor, but when I was packing the dirt and the entry wound, I got bone infection through the scapula, which wasn't too far back in there. Of course, like I said, I had packed an awful lot of dirt in there, but I had staph infection and bone infection. And even though I had a fractured scapula from the gunshot wound that had quite a few holes in my back and right leg, there was the infection that was going to kill me, not the wounds itself. So I was in very bad condition for almost 6 months, just from the again, not from the wounds so much as the infections.
So you were at Cam Ranh Bay for about a month.
Cam Ranh Bay for roughly a month, yes.
And then how did you go back to the States, on a hospital ship or
a plane?
An airplane?
Yep. Now, actually, it was Starlifters, I think is what they call them. They converted them into flying hospitals. So we went from Vietnam to Japan to Alaska to Andrews Air Force Base. Yeah, I think it's Andrews Air Force Base. So stayed at a hospital there, and then it was shipped over to St. Albans Naval Hospital in Brooklyn, or outside of Brooklyn.
Okay.
I think it's actually in Queens, St. Albans Naval Hospital. But I spent roughly 5 months there before being discharged back to active duty.
Wow.
But when I was in the Air Force Hospital, all the nurses were officers. And this one woman, she was probably, of course, I was 19, 20, so she was like middle-aged, and she was like a lieutenant colonel. And I used to get a kick out of saluting. Because I couldn't use my right arm and all, so I'd salute them with my left hand. Of course, they snapped to and salute back to me. And I didn't dare tell them that, I shouldn't be saluting them left-handed, but that was just my little inside joke. And, but she was a lieutenant colonel. She said to me, they're going to offer you a medical discharge, but I recommend you don't take it, that you stay in. And I took her advice. I think I could have been.
Did she say why?
She felt it would be a detriment to me for any, career that I wanted to get into.
I see.
Because of the so-called stigma of being disabled.
Yep.
Even though it's combat disabled, you would be disabled, and that would, as a matter of fact, it probably would have prevented me from what I retired as a parole officer. So I took her advice and stuck it out.
So you spent 5 months in the hospital. You went through a rehab program.
They didn't have that back in those days.
Okay.
I want to damn the Navy, but you had one nurse who was the administrator, and then you had a couple of corpsmen that would take care of all these seriously wounded Marines and sailors and soldiers.
But was there any sort of therapy because of your shoulder?
Nothing.
You just had to let it naturally heal.
Yes, as a matter of fact, because of my infection, All the sutures that they gave me, they had to cut loose and let me heal from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
They went back to, I guess they figured it was World War I technology or medical treatment. You know, they kept me high on antibiotics and high on painkillers too. But so, as a consequence, my scars are probably bigger than they would have been had I not been infected.
Mm-hmm. Now, while you were stateside, did you get in the hospital? Did you get to go home at all on weekends at all, or?
Yes, every other weekend I could go home on convalescent leave.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to be. What's funny is I had to be healthy enough to go on leave. So you know, you had to pass certain, your urine tests. If you went to the bathroom, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they did blood tests on you. I mean, I'm at fault for my first time out on leave. I should have probably returned back to the hospital when my thighs started swelling on me. And I said, this is so good being home. Of course, I had a girlfriend at the time, dating, and trying to get back to
Uh-huh.
a regular life. Although they had no clue. That's another whole story. But they just looked upon somebody all right, he's walking around with a limp and he's got scars all over. Actually, they're all open wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I should have gone back, I didn't. I waited till my last day, and they had to do an emergency operation on my right thigh because of the infection had traveled up to my thigh, and really, I had to cut my utility trousers in order to get my pants on. That's how bad my leg got.
Jeez.
So, and they were thinking of court-martialing me for that.
Huh.
They said, you were in an awful lot of pain. You should have been back here sooner. I said, well, can you blame me? You gave me 14 days. I was going to take off 14 days. But I should have come back maybe at 7.
Mm-hmm.
But, this is how they took, they did this operation. I've got this big drain coming out. And I'm high on Darvon or Percocet or whatever they would give us for pain control. And they said, you've got to clean your own wound. We don't have enough people to take care of you. I remember taking all this packing out and stuff, and I'm taking a Q-tip and I'm hitting it, thinking, this stuff doesn't want to come out. And I realized it was my bone. I'm thinking, oh my God. But that's, but that's the kind of treatment you got because they were short-staffed.
Mm-hmm.
Because you think of most of the military, the corpsmen and nurses and whatnot would be over in Vietnam. So this is my way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why there was such a shortage of medical staff in the stateside hospitals. But it was a good way to, if you love staying high, it was really a good place to be because that it's much easier to take care of patients who are high and deal with their pain that way than have them deal with under normal circumstances.
Once you were discharged from the hospital, where did they send you next?
Well, I had 2 choices. I could have gone to California, but because I was dating a girl and was going to marry her, I decided to stay in Brooklyn. So they assigned me to the 3rd Naval District Correctional Center, also known as a brig. So I went from being a patient one day to being on 12-hour standing duty a day, working in the brig. There was no easing you back into an assignment.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't done any full duty in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really a tough adjustment because they didn't so you're cleared to come back full duty, so we're not going to have you you can't stand, we're not going to give you
right.
There's no such thing as light duty.
Right.
So I went back to full duty.
And what kind of quarters did you have? Were you living in civilian quarters or military?
No, actually we had there's a wing there set aside just for the brig sentries. And of course we're in a naval base. Mm-hmm. And of course the Marines were isolated. And there was there was a lot of animosity back in those days between the Marines and the Navy, and of course I could never buy into it. And the guys want to get all, the Marines want to get all souped up, want to fight with some sailors in a bar and stuff like that. And I used to say to them, what's it say on your paycheck? It doesn't say United States Marine Corps. It says Department of the Navy. I said, these people are paying us. I don't feel I want to fight with people who are paying me. So that was my attitude, my approach to it.
Mm-hmm. Now, how long were you there for?
October to September. October of 68 to September of 69. And
Okay.
I was blessed with some really unusual experiences being in both astronaut parades. They landed on the moon. It was January when they had a ticker tape parade for them when they landed on the moon. And then July of 69 one day. I'm sorry. They orbited the moon. So the ticker tape parade was in January. And then when they landed on the moon, it was in July. So we went, and we were out there in our dress blues, so we went from freezing to death, because in dress blues, all you get is a t-shirt underneath that jacket.
Mm-hmm.
So we were freezing to death in January. Of course, in July, we're out there sweating to death in the dress blues because they drew such heat. But, you know, being in both ticker tape parades was quite an experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some very, you know, not only did we run the brig, but we were the colonel's crack parade unit. And also we did a lot of burial details too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was quite interesting. Some of it was disturbing, especially the burial details. But the parades were always kind of neat. And you know, when you were off duty, and here's how they never gave much thought to you getting sleep. You were on 6 hours off, 6 hours on, 6 hours. During the day, the 6 hours off, you either somehow got sucked into some parade detail, funeral detail. And plus you had to relieve the on-duty guys to go off and have their lunch time or supper time break, that kind of thing. So you never, ever got even a 6 hour stretch where you could sleep, because you could never get 6 hours. So the guys didn't like it very much. We had a lot of guys go AWOL.
Mm-hmm.
In the Marine Corps, when you go AWOL, they really treat you bad.
Mm-hmm.
I had to supervise some of the guys that I was assigned to the barracks with. So that was tough, dealing with, you know, the guy that I was sharing meals with a week ago went AWOL and is now back in the brig as a prisoner. So.
Now, when you were in the hospital, did you encounter anyone that had been under fire with you when you were wounded?
No, that's the, I ran across a guy years later, as a matter of fact, before we started this, I told you about a guy in my unit that went back to Vietnam. He was wounded the day before I was. He was wounded on that Saturday, I was wounded on Sunday. And a good friend of mine was killed on that Sunday, or no, I'm sorry, on that Saturday. And he went back and got some soil, souvenir soil for me and anybody else that was still alive from Hill 861 Alpha.
Mm-hmm.
And, but no, actually, spending time with anybody that was experiencing that, no. There may have been a few guys when I was in a short period of time at Fubai, but after that, when I went down to Cam Ranh Hospital, it was, I was with sailors, soldiers, and Marines down there. So you had all your different branches of service at that hospital. So just like going over to Vietnam, I was by myself. When I was in hospital, I was by myself. As far as like not being with anybody I served with.
So you were discharged from that last duty station?
Yes, not because my time was up. The Marines were being pulled out of Vietnam in '69, and they had all of us old salts, like 70% of the Marines in my barracks were, Purple Heart recipients. Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, all kinds of, awards for valor. So we were a very, kind of say a salty unit too. But I kept thinking, I got another year to go, because it was really tough duty. Our colonel was a real tough disciplinarian, and if he caught you out of uniform, like if something on your ribbon was not quite right, he'd say, "Did I promote you?" "Sir, yes, sir. I'm demoting you. Report to my office," that kind of thing. So he's a real tough colonel. And everybody, I mean, and he, you know, you had to play basketball with him too, and he was a real dirty player. But it was just, that's the way he operated. And I remember getting called in by the warrant officer, my gunnery sergeant, the people in charge of, I became a sergeant in charge of the brig because I was one of the few guys that messed up. And I kept saying, I signed up for the Marine Corps for 3 years, and I'm not going to give them a day more. Especially my attitude towards the Marine Corps started changing, at, you know, the brig in Brooklyn. And I get called in. My gunnery sergeant and I were close, and the warrant officer and I were, those two were close with me because they liked the way I ran the brig. And they said, "Gary, we got some good news and bad news for you." I said, "Well, what's the good news?" He said, "I want to hear that first." He says, "Well, we're going to allow you to re-enlist." I said, "Well, what's the bad news?" He said, "You're going to go home soon." I said, "Well, I'm going to go home." They said, "The reason why we want you in here, or we called you in here, is we want you to re-enlist and become an officer." And that's when I said to them, I said, "You know, this is off the record. I got so much respect for you guys, but I've seen the way the colonel has disrespected you. I want nothing more of this Marine Corps." Because they were 2 combat vets also. I don't remember what the colonel's history was, but the treatment of his officers, his enlisted ranks, you know, I'm saying officer ranks, like, you know, above E5, was very poor. So that's what allowed me to get out early. Only for the convenience of it was for the convenience of the government. That's how I got my discharge. So I served just under 26 months.
Now, once you were discharged, you came back home.
Yes.
And did you go to work or go to school?
No,
or?
no, I went straight back to my state job as mail and supply clerk. And in the interim, I had taken a correction officer exam. Because when I was working in the brig, we also took continuing education courses in the brig, and so I got into corrections. And correction officer was paying like $8,600 a year. I was making $4,700. So I said, this is a no-brainer. Of course, little did I realize after going into, you figure, I got discharged in September. I was back at my job as mail and supply clerk, had taken the correction officer exam, and they wanted me to report for duty February of 1970. And of course I showed up thinking it was an interview. I didn't realize that they wanted me to work that day. So I started March 5th, actually, start date as a correction officer.
Whereabouts?
In Green Haven Correctional Facility. So it was like going from almost from the frying pan into the fire, because then Attica jumped off that year too, 1970. So there was like no, Green Haven wasn't a tough prison to work at. There was mostly lifers down there, and they followed the rules so that they wouldn't get transferred out for bad behavior. Because the #1 assignment down at Green Haven was visiting hours. Or the visiting room was constantly packed 7 days a week. But coming up to Comstock, that was 6 months after I started at Green Haven, I went up to Comstock to work at Great Meadow, and it was had quite a tough reputation, and it was. So, but you know, I was in the Marine Corps, so I could handle that. It wasn't like I was a civilian going in that kind of environment.
And how long were you a correction officer for?
I think 4 years. Then I was a corrections sergeant. Then I became a personnel administrator. Then I became a correction counselor. Then my last 15 years I moved over into parole. I was a parole officer before retiring in 2003.
Now, did you have any college with that, or was it all?
Okay, no, when I came back from the Marine Corps, at Great Meadow I started with Empire, I took a 2-year leave of absence, that's right, to get my associate degree through Adirondack Community College, which is now SUNY Adirondack, I think. And then I got my bachelor's degree through Empire State College, and it's pretty much in its infancy. So, yep, I got my bachelor's in applied science, with criminal justice being my major. So that was that in a nutshell.
And when did you retire?
December 2003. And it's a total of, well, people say to me, well, it's military time too you got. I said, yeah, think of how many people, how they spent their military time. It was quite a bit different. I have no regrets about it. Everything that happened to me in the service, I look at it this way, I survived it and I benefited from it. Kind of kept me a little different from my peers. When you have those, and they're going to find that out more as these Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans come back. That whole can of worms is going to reopen itself because the population has no idea what these people really encountered. And that was my problem also. I couldn't relate to anybody. I remember going back as a mail and supply clerk, and obviously I must have changed in my behavior. They actually had the nerve to say to me, we'd like to have you, we only got the old Gary back. I'd say, he died. He's over Vietnam. This is the new guy you got to deal with. Because I went from being a kid to being, a sergeant in the Marine Corps. So, and of course, I didn't know I changed, but they really made me aware that I changed. And they were actually part of the reason why I was in such a hurry to get away from that office scenario. Because I was the little darling. I was the only, at that time, I was the only 18-year-old in that office complex of 400 women and, all these, male supervisors and whatnot. And they used to send me packages, and it was, your OSR harem. OSR meaning, I would say, residence office, and harem. I mean, they adored me. But they adored only this little 18-year-old. When I came back, they were like, ooh, shocked at my behavior. So, and so they actually, the way that they received me just pushed me into corrections that quick.
Have you had any ongoing medical problems from being wounded?
No, knock on wood. Things that come on with age, that's going to be the problem. But I stay very active, and I feel sorry. I shouldn't the Albany VA, they called me in. They reevaluate you periodically. And I still have shrapnel in my shoulder, and I have all these doctors coming up with different ways to, let's go through his chest to get the shrapnel that's underneath his scapula, and let's do this and let's do that. And I call up and say to the chief of surgeons, I just saw 2 doctors and they have totally different diagnoses. He goes, pick the one that you think is best. I said, thank God I don't need this. But you had to be careful, because if you refused an operation, they would say, oh, then we're going to take this disability away from you. Because I was receiving compensation for, and that's another thing, people misunderstand, disability is different than compensation. I was compensated for the gunshot wound and the fragmentation wound to my lower back and right leg. So I was actually receiving compensation for 3 different injuries or wounds.
Have you suffered from post-traumatic stress at all?
Yeah. I wouldn't like to go into detail, but yeah.
Okay, sure. All right. I'm actually getting low on film now, so I'd like to put in another cassette, and we can look at some of the artifacts you have.
Yes, great.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, now or change?
I've got a couple minutes left.
Okay. Was there any time when you or the other Marines thought that you could actually lose that base?
As a matter of fact, we never thought we could keep it. We knew we were badly outnumbered there. So the answer to the question is, we were surprised that we could stay there as long as we did. But we also realized the only thing that kept us there was the air support. If we didn't have the air support, we would have gone out like the French did. Caisson was known as Dien Bien Phu with the French. And that's when Johnson used to say, "I don't want another damn Den Ben Phu," he used to call it. And he says, you know, he didn't want Caisson to fall like it did with the French in the 50s.
What is your estimation of the fighting abilities, not just the NBA and Viet Cong, but also the ARVN?
The ARVN, I never got to experience much with them, other than maybe shooting them if we got hit that night. But the NBA, I had a lot of respect for them. Really well disciplined. They knew all of our names in the perimeter because they always come down and listen to us at night, bullshitting, and even during the daytime. So a lot of times you know, "Hey Gary," and it's not in the perimeter; it's them down there. I mean, they had tunnels dug right up along our trench lines and everything. Periodically, some bombing runs would come close and would collapse their tunnels outside of our perimeter. So then they start thinking, we ought to run some bombing runs close periodically just to collapse all those tunnels. Because our big fear is they're going to come and tunnel up into our perimeter.
Right, let me stop it. All right, you want to continue with your question?
Why don't we start?
Go ahead.
Did you have any unpleasant circumstances when you came back with people against the war?
Oh yeah. Actually, it all, you know, you didn't realize how much animosity there was towards, you know, the war, and of course it would be vented at us, especially, I want to say Marines, only because of my experiences in the Brooklyn Brig. We had, part of our details was parades and funerals, but I forgot to mention also we had riot control. And we would go out with, of course all of us Marines were combat vets, and we knew all the formations and stuff, but they would intersperse every other man was a sailor. And these poor guys were really on edge, nervous, when we had to face demonstrators who were throwing stuff at us, intimidating us, and but you know, we knew, you know, the Marines knew that. I mean, we were going to, you know, if we had to use our batons, we were going to definitely use them. And the sailors didn't have that kind of background. So it just, I gave no thought to what we had to do until I was, you know, in line with these sailors who had no combat experience. And they were really kind of, you know, nervous about it. I gotta just, and we'll talk about things in the perimeter. At Khe Sahn, at Hill 558, one of your duties was to listen for tunneling. And what they do is you drove these rods into the ground, and you just stand there for periods of time just listening for any kind of tunneling going through. So yes, we, you know, actually we set that, you know, that procedure up after we realized that they had tunneled outside of our perimeter.
Did you ever hear anything?
I didn't, but I knew. Well, we used to hear them at nighttime talking to each other, and one of the scariest things is getting a human wave attack, and the way they set them up is just. Again, you think you're like in a movie, but this isn't real. You'd see flashlights out there, or you see lights, and you realize they're flashlights, and then there was somebody with a drum beating signals for them how to get online. Of course, before they charged, they unloaded their artillery on us. And they're trying to blow out our barbed wire and detonate our minefields. So, and I only had one of those, and it was bad enough because just, I think everybody pooped and peed their pants because it was just outrageous. But
were you on Khe Sahn when that was?
We're at Hill at 558, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I have to say, that was probably the most scared I was ever in my life, because you realize you never have enough ammunition. But the only thing that saved us was actually, I think it was naval artillery fire that, you know, came in, or maybe it was from Camp Carroll, where they had the big guns. We had 105s in our perimeter, and they had 155s, yep. And the NBA had, I think, the equivalent of 175s. And so it was, that night was, that's right, it was the from Camp Carroll, because the rounds, a lot of them were falling short and landing behind us. which were making gigantic craters. And thank God nobody got wounded in our perimeter from that. But I just went, if things were quiet, you would hear from our combat base where the airstrip was, because we had a 106 that was the biggest weapon we had in our perimeter, and they had 105s and combat base, and you hear boom, boom, and they're shooting at the NVA positions to draw out their fire, and all you hear is toof, toof from our end, and then you hear wha-boom, wha-boom from that end, and I say to the guys, what the hell's wrong with this picture? What the hell? How come we don't have anything like that? Well, what they were doing was trying to get positions on where those cannon were, so they could get them an arc light, which is they saturate, completely bomb a grid on a map, from the air. I mean, they would completely blow away a whole section of territory, but they never caught those guns. Never caught them out in the open. That's what they were hoping for. They would coordinate it so that when they shot out towards the NVA, and they were coming out with their guns to return fire, that's when the arc light, they were hoping that it was all coordinated so they could catch them out in the open, because they had to come out of the tunnels to shoot those cannon. Of course, I never saw pictures of them, but I know what they sounded like, and I know what it felt like when they did, get some rounds at us.
I've read that they had tanks at, not us, them.
Oh, yeah. I had a problem with my lieutenant because of that. As a matter of fact, when I mentioned this other, another radio operator, Tony Pepper, hearing tanks. And, of course, they brought that up first because he was up further on the perimeter than I was. And they used to call me diarrhea legs because I was all over the perimeter. I was like the mayor of the perimeter, too. So I was talking to him and said, I keep hearing things at night up this way. What do you get? And he says, well, I got them too, plus we see headlights. And so I started coordinating with him the times that we would hear this, and try to get information together, presented it to my lieutenant. He says, intelligence says there's nothing up there. There's no tanks at all that the NVA have because of the mountainous area. They're going to get them there. There's no roads up that way. I mean, this is what he told me, and I couldn't go any further with that information. But there's a green and gray outpost not too far outside of us. And it was manned with the Green Beret and the Bru, which were the native Vietnamese. The French called them montagnards, mountain people. And their perimeter got overrun. That was in February, maybe late February. And I remember hearing the transmission from the Green Beret radio operator saying, we've got to get the hell out of here. There's tanks coming into our perimeter. And I think it was 5 NVA tanks overran that perimeter. But again, there was none, according to our intelligence. So yes, there were. I believe there were tanks. I heard them, and
Well, I've read that there were.
yeah, I'm sure there was probably more than that too. It's just from the area where I was, I'm sure there's other, and I have to share with, if there ever run across guys that were on Hill 1015 and 950, I'd have to salute them because they had a much tougher time than we did, because they couldn't get food up there at all, because they were so high up in the mountains, and they're up on these very narrow mountaintops, and they would have only a platoon in the whole perimeter up there, and they were left, the NVA would periodically assault them just to try to lodge them off of there, or dislodge them. So those poor guys, even though we saw daily action, whether it was bombing, snipers, machine gun fire coming in at us, they had every night, it was almost like a battle to the end. And I don't even know how the heck we got enough equipment up there for them to even survive any kind of assault. But, so, again, it goes back to, as bad as you think you have it, there's other people that got it worse. So.
You've brought some things in with you.
Yes. This is the actual, well, this is a little display case that Char and I put together, which, you know, has a picture of me in my perimeter.
Actually, if you can tilt that towards me a little more, I'm
Okay.
getting glare. That's perfect,
Okay.
just like that.
And that's my M16 that was shot apart the day I was wounded. Here's the armor-piercing .30 caliber round that got me. And the irony is, if that didn't hit my buckle, I would have had a pretty clean wound. But it hit my buckle, and of course it mushroomed like crazy. You can still see the core of the jacket. That almost round circle thing here is the actual tip of the bullet.
Hmm.
And there, I'm sure there's probably some other pieces that are either still in me or had gone through. But that bullet was taken out 1978. No, 80.
Maybe Dr. the Signal?
Yeah,
No, that was
86.
86.
86.
Hmm.
Actually, the only thing I had was the core. A corpsman had cut that. They used to have, the corpsman would practice on sewing you up and cutting things out and stuff. I should say it was an Air Force. It wasn't a corpsman. It was an Air Force nurse. He took that out for me at Cameron Bay. And somehow, I don't know if I sent it home. I don't know how I managed to keep that without losing it. But then in 1986, these additional pieces came out because I had a tumor develop on the exit hole of the scar. And of course, this is a typical picture taken in advanced infantry training in North Carolina. These are, standard issue, from here over. Of course, the Purple Heart, National Defense Medal, Vietnam campaign, Vietnam service, service and end campaign. This is something this medal was thrown on the table by the at that time the Veterans Counselor, along with it. At that time it was Governor Rockefeller. It was a conspicuous service medal from the state of New York, and the little extra cross on there is that you got that if you were in combat, and then if you got wounded, you got an extra little identifying thing. It's not an oak leaf cluster or anything else like that, but after I was discharged, they came up with issuing these medals to us, jarheads. Oh, let me take this. This will continue the story. This is my Purple Heart certificate. And on there it states it was April 7th I was wounded. And the date of the receipt of Purple Heart was quite interesting. It was October. 21st day of October, 1968. So either they had one hell of a backlog, or there was not that much interest in issuing Purple Heart, at any specific time.
Oops.
I remember I was still a patient in the hospital. Oh, wait a minute. No, I got a Purple Heart when I was a patient in the hospital. So then they just must have issued the certificate separate from the Purple Heart itself. But what happened with the Marine Corps, they had to have, this represents this little ribbon up here. Well, actually, there's a naval, I want to say commemorate, but to recognize the Gulf Company 26th Marines and actually the 26th Marine Regiment for what they did in Vietnam. We had the Presidential Unit Citation, which they didn't have a ribbon for back in those days. You just had a little ribbon given to you. And there's the combat action ribbon, and the naval unit citation, presidential unit citation, which I found this out after I got discharged.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, this is the combat action ribbon, or medal. They didn't have a ribbon per se. It's now only like a commemorative one. But that's all you had with your uniform. This would go over this. Did you get any of those?
I got a combat action in the NUC.
Yep.
And no, they're an actual ribbon. You've seen mine, but I was in 4 years after you.
Okay, that's okay. See, that's
There's a difference there.
Mm-hmm.
but also because there's another ribbon.
I was in Vietnam 4 years after you.
I bet you I forgot that one on the table.
Oh, yeah, there's one by your foot. Your left foot.
Oh, no. Oh, yes. Okay. Well, here's my other purple. No, they actually gave me a Purple Heart to wear with my uniform. They also had, you know, this Purple Heart was presented to me with that certificate. And I also got this. This is what the Purple Heart really looked like when George Washington issued it. Okay, that's it right there. It's just merit. And I think it was to be worn on the left sleeve, if I remember. And that's probably where you got your heart on your sleeve from, that kind of thing.
Oh.
But also, we got the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry Unit Medal, which I didn't receive when I was in service. This came about after. Or maybe 69 or 70, you know, they issue those things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it all together.
Was there anything that any medal that they commemorated service in Khe Sahn itself?
There was, see, I didn't, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. It was actually for protecting the civilians and the coffee plantation and the village itself.
I think it was called the
Civil action?
Civil Action Honor.
Yes, I got
medal,
that
yeah.
also. Yep. Yeah. Good thinking, Gary. I forgot about that one. But at that time, I mean, none of that stuff was nothing. There was no deal made out of anything. And just like I said, when I got the Conspicuous Service Medal from the state of New York, signed by Governor Rockefeller, when I was a counselor at Mount McGregor, we ran a veterans program up there. And of course I was in charge of the program because of my experience. They had caught on to the fact that Mount McGregor had an awful lot of Vietnam veterans that working there as correction officers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had a ceremony just for us. And I got, for some reason they felt that I should be reissued a Conspicuous Service Medal because the ceremony wasn't performed.
Mm-hmm.
When they gave it to me, it was just, you know, an envelope tossed across the table. So Governor Cuomo signed my second one, which I thought was, and then of course I found out I was eligible for the extra cross application to denote that it's, you know, not only was he in service, but he was wounded in service. Mm-hmm. So it was, you know, it's quite an educational program in itself. And just, I have to share this because I don't think many people know. And we used to run the stats all the time with Vietnam vets, or the whole Vietnam War in total. Of all the millions that served, 10% actually saw combat. 5% were wounded, 1% were killed. Hmm. So when you have that big a disparity of people serving as opposed to people who are actually in combat, I have a Purple Heart plate, and the reason why I wanted that Purple Heart plate, you know, when they offered it, I said, it'd be a great way for me to run across fellow veterans. Mm-hmm. Once in a while, you know, somebody drives by and salutes me, or I'll run across them, but it was shocking how few people I run across with combat experience. Mm-hmm. So, and then when I started going into the stats, I think that's also in the stats, the war that had the highest number of gunshot wounds was in Vietnam. Because so much of the fighting was close in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas World War II, World War I, Korea, there's a lot more artillery injuries. So I thought, when I saw that at first about the stats of gunshot wounds, I would have thought like maybe Civil War or even maybe World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But when I saw it was Vietnam, then I started thinking, yes, I mean, because so much of it was small unit engagements. The North Vietnamese were not stupid. They would never attack a company of Marines. They'd attack a platoon to ensure that they would have success. But, you know, if you have a sizable number of Marines out there, and then of course the air support that comes in increases the likelihood that they weren't going to succeed in their attack. So, but they were very, very smart, very tough people.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I think because they could survive on so much less food than us, I wouldn't say that we were all that much better than they were. It's just circumstances. I couldn't imagine if they had air power, what the hell it would have been like for us. Or if they even had naval gunfire like what we used to experience.
Mm-hmm.
They called them flying boxcars. When the naval support came in, of course, we were almost always in clouds. And from the shock waves, you could actually follow the naval round going through. Like, it's just, you know, incredible. Of course, the accuracy from being, you know, those guns shooting from the ocean
Mm-hmm.
over to us, you know, over and actually, you know, thank God none of those rounds ever fell short, because I don't know how many hundreds of pounds those things were. It was bad enough to be on the receiving end of 175 millimeters. I couldn't imagine anything that big, but I think that pretty much. Unless
What was it like watching the, you've seen a lot of area bombardments. What was it like to see that?
Well, I think I mentioned it, you know, at one point, you almost, there's many times when you don't think it's real. You think you're in war production, because a lot of it you're, you know, until, you know, you're actually getting, you know, either shrapnel or, you know, machine gun fire or rocket rounds were the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
You pretty much went, oh wow, look at that napalm, or look at those, they're dropping 500-pounders, or when they did an arc, like, you know, they got the 1,000-pound bombs coming in saturating, which were, you know, so surreal. It's like, oh my God. So a lot of that, you're almost like detached until you got into the real nitty-gritty. But yeah, it was, there was something that floated through my mind there with that. But, you know, on a day-to-day basis, though, it was still, it was, you know, pretty edgy, everything. I don't think we ever went by a day where there was a lull. Either, you know, we were drawing fire from them, or, of course, we had orders. Now, mind you, if you shot your weapon, especially if something was in the barbed wire, our captain, I don't know why we ran across such hard-ass, you know, my colonel down in the brig and my captain at Caisson, he said, if you discharge your weapon, there better be blood. And if it's not theirs, it might better be yours, because you're going to get an ass whipping. Because, you know, they didn't want anybody just shooting willy-nilly.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you an idea of what happens, we had a lack of communication, a guy in a listening post, you know, so we thought there was a guy coming in from a listening post, because it was some guy just trotting up, got his rifle like this, and came right through the 3 rows of barbed wire fences. So we knew he knew the path. He gets up to where lieutenant's office, or bunker is, unloads his weapon at the bunker. Now we realize it was a North Vietnamese soldier. Runs back out through the perimeter, the whole side opened up on him and nobody hit him. That's when the captain said, next time there better be blood. It's going to have to be yours if there isn't any out there. So, yeah, I mean, so most people think, you know, when the shit hits the fan, when it's, you know, stuff really going down, things get crazy, like machine gunners. They had to watch it under, you know, like that human wave assault. Guys cooked the barrels on the gun because they got so caught up that they forgot to switch the barrels over, because you're only good for, I think, around 500 rounds per barrel or something like that. I don't remember what they, that's why you got the A gunner with the asbestos gloves. I mean, they keep switching those barrels around. But also, 200 rounds of ammunition, like what I used to carry, and that was a lot. A lot of guys only carried 100, 150. Your gun shoots up an awful lot more than that. And you know, I forget the cyclic rate of fire is 450 rounds a minute or something like that, or some, you know, bizarre. So technically, you could shoot up all the ammunition you have in less than 2 minutes or a minute. So that was also hammered home. You know, you don't put it on full automatic for anything. That's for the movies. The real life is, you know, semi-automatic or just manual.
You were mentioning how much stuff you were carrying. How much weight did you actually carry?
I could, you know, Wayne, if I had to think about what that, because it was shocking.
You couldn't do it today.
No, and I remembered missing my step going over a stream going up to attack and assault the hill.
I think it was usually at least 60 pounds.
I would have to say, with the, we had, oh, also.
With his radio, it must have been more
Well,
than
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Well, you figure, we had the PR-25s. They're called the prick 25s because they were a prick to carry. We had the old, you know, they had the PR-10s, I think were the newer ones or something, the lighter weight. This was a big old box from the 50s probably. But that also probably helped save me. When the grenade went off, it blew off most of the radio, but that damn thing still worked with the battery hanging off of it and everything. Yeah, I couldn't, I think if I had to think about what weight went on there, because when I saw them putting the mortar rounds on, I'm thinking, oh my God, and then extra machine gun ammo went up on there, and so yeah, I couldn't imagine what I was carrying. But when you're 19, you don't give much thought to it.
How much did you weigh when you came out, and how much did you weigh when you went over?
I probably I have a good shot of me, you know, stateside, and that's 6 months after. You can still see my teeth through my cheeks. I think I weighed about 160 going in, and I was just under 140. But I went from a size 30 waist down to a size 26. But oh, the thing about poorly equipped, I had stateside boots on when I got over there, and that was before they realized, they came up with the Vietnam combat boots, you know, the ones that the clay didn't stick to as much.
Yeah.
So my soles had rotted off, and I had to tie with, whatever I can get, string or whatnot, tie my soles to the top of my boot so they didn't go flip-flop all over the place. And when I was wounded, I remember telling them one thing, because I just got my stateside, or my combat boots. And I said to them, don't let anybody get my combat boots. Take everything else you want, but I want my combat boots. So I remember when they carted me into the Phu-Bai hospital, he said, where the hell are you going with your boots? I said, they're going home with me. I had to go through all that time in Vietnam with those goddamn stateside boots. Now I want my combat boots.
You still have them?
Ironically, no. What's crazy is when you, after a period of time, you cut everything loose, except where I do, like I mentioned earlier, I do still have my dress blues, but I'm not fitting into them. I can tell you that much.
Now, did you stay in contact with some of the people you were in service with?
Well, yes, on a loose basis. I have this this guy Robert Crabb had just sent me the soil from 861 Alpha, and he sent me this guy. I actually got to talk to him on by telephone not that long ago, because I got this CD, a couple CDs, and a bag of dirt, and no letter, and he doesn't have a phone number. So anyways, Shar and I, especially Shar, worked. We backtracked it and got his phone number, went to his address, and he was really shocked. But we're talking about the differences in our take on what happened in the perimeter and all that. And he didn't remember me loaning my poncho liner. We were given so little stuff. I didn't even have a rain poncho or anything. I just, like I said, I had the shirt and pants and my boots, and that was it, and my helmet. But I would loan him the poncho liner when I was on duty so that he could sleep and stay warm. Of course, he never went and took a shower or bath, and it used to smell quite ripe. I didn't want to tell him that. I remember it well because it stunk. But he once went down with me on a water run. Now here this guy, and he sounds like a really nice guy. I had a lot of fun with him in the perimeter. He goes down to the water run. Now, I'm thinking, every day I'm bathing. This guy hasn't, the whole time I knew him, didn't bathe. Leans down in the water and washes his mustache. I thought, that's all you're going to do? But I said, that's why my poncho liner, you know, he remembers having a poncho liner, somebody loaning it to him. And I said, that was me. But then, you know, he remembered, you know, things were a little different take. He was in, I think he was a machine gunner. He was a machine gunner or mortars, one of those two. But he didn't want to hang out with me because he felt I was dangerous enough, you know, just being the radio operator there. But he, you know, he was, like I said, he was wounded the day before, and my good buddy was killed that day. But we took in, we had easily 50% casualties out of those 2 days of fighting. But the stats, I wish I'd thought to bring that. The stats for the casualties at Caisson is really quite high. You know, you're dealing in the thousands. But that's over a course of time. That wasn't just the 2 days that I was involved.
Now, did you join any veterans organizations at all?
I was telling my wife, I get a request from a VFW. I do belong to the American Legion up here in Whitehall because my ancestor, Solomon Rod, Civil War, joined the GAR, which became the American Legion post there. So we've got his signatures, and he said, well, he probably drank in there at the same time, or you know, same place that I was having a beer with the guys and stuff. So I joined that late, but I am a life member of the Military Order of the Purple Heart and American Legion, or Disabled American Veterans. I joined the VFW when I first came out of the service. The first thing they wanted to do was, oh, you got dress blues. We're going to put you in the Pearl Harbor Day Parade. So, and I'm the only one who showed up with dress uniforms. Everybody's showing up with their usual hodgepodge, you know, slap together thing. And I felt a little uncomfortable about that. But they wanted me like their poster child. And so I went to their first, I didn't know what a smoker was. So here I am, you know, the only young Vietnam vet in there. And you got all these older guys and beer and cigarettes and watching porn flicks. And I said, I didn't come here to sit with these old timers and watch porn flicks. So I was in one meeting and that was it. And I didn't join anything until the American Legion. Well, I did join the Military Order of Purple Heart because I thought that that would be an active unit, but not in New York. As a matter of fact, they assigned me to my hometown, Chapter 118, and it's non-existent. There's nobody there. So the DAV, I didn't bother going in with them either. So I felt at least it was, you know, I joined the membership. I just was not active. But now with the American Legion up here, I think I will become more active.
You mentioned about the guards you were working with in Mount McGregor, being a lot of veterans there.
Yes.
How about the customers on the other side?
Oh, I had some.
Did anybody ever keep track of any of those to see if they were veterans? Or?
Well, see, the true test of anybody being a veteran is you just got to see their DD-214.
Yeah. That
tells everything. And a lot of them, the administration wanted bodies in the program. They didn't care about so-called legitimate vets. And so they got a whole bunch of inmates shipped to me. I started going through, I said, where are DD-214s? They said, this is at Auburn, that they were transferred into my program. I said, oh, they didn't require that at Auburn, and because we want to protect our rights. What if we're trained to be a sniper or something? We don't want corrections knowing about that. I said, well, if you don't produce a DD-214, you're not in the program because you're not a real veteran. You know, if you can't show me that you're an you know, because all you got to do is know if they've been in country and the different operations they were on and stuff like that. It's all there. And so I was throwing out a lot of them that were not in-country veterans, especially like what they had claimed. But I was also told to lighten up. Instead of, you know, I remember the statement was, I said to my senior counselor, what do you want, window dressing? He goes, yes, and I want recognition for it. I said, well, I'll give you the biggest display you ever want to see. If that's what you want, you're going to get it. Because what am I going to do, become a martyr? You fight them. But a lot of the veterans, I used to run an in-country counseling group, inmate veterans in country, and a lot of them were very, 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 very sad what they did while they were over there. And I understood why they became criminals, because they were into shooting, civilians and all this other stuff. Committed quite a few atrocities, and I could see when I was in Vietnam, when I was at Khe Sahn, I started paying attention to these guys wearing strings of what I looked like mushrooms. What's that? I said, they're ears. I said, ears? I said, yeah, every NVA kill, they cut an ear off them. I'm thinking, find a better way, to get a souvenir than ears, especially over in that environment, But I was a firm believer, even if I was to be around, killed NVA, I wouldn't do anything. Why would you, defile yourself to do something of that nature to the enemy? I mean, I didn't hate them. They were doing their job just like I was doing my job. But I can understand people get caught up in the passion at the time and whatnot. But
This is another question. You haven't been back over since you got out.
no,
You haven't had a desire to?
no. Well, my friend sent me these CDs with all. I mean, he just went crazy. He went all over the place over there. But he was back up at Hill 860, 558, which they have different numbers now. But we're still 558 and 560. But Hill 861, 861 Alpha, it's all reverted back to jungle. And I don't even think there's a coffee plantation there anymore. But no, I often thought that you wouldn't be able to tell anyway, and that's what he said.
It wouldn't be the same place,
Because now I think that was 43 years ago.
Yeah.
It's
You
like,
seem like every time you pick up a travel magazine today, you're advertising, come to Vietnam, it's such a pretty place. And,
well, you know
and
something.
they make you welcome.
Well, let me tell you something. Even though I was in combat, I remember flying into, it was coming over Caisson base before it, all hell broke loose. Thinking, man, that's beautiful down there. The greens, the incredible, I mean, you're talking hundreds of shades of green and everything else. And of course, the Caisson means red clay. And the soil looked almost like it's bleeding. It's so red, especially when it's damp. And anybody could, if you were back at the hospital, I didn't have to say I was from Caisson. They'd look at my eyes. I'd still have all the pink, there was like dyed pink in here, and you had the red pigmentations in your skin. And they said, "You're at Caisson, huh? How do you know?" You got to get a mirror and then, be able to understand. Oh, that's another thing. I never had a mirror the whole time I was over there. And I used to volunteer to do many things, and one of them was give haircuts. And thank God nobody had mirrors, because I think some people would have kicked my ass if they could have saw. And actually, in this shot here, somebody got back at me. I have one of the worst hairlines across there. It's chopped here and then drops down like that. So, and we didn't have any scissors. We just had a hand clipper. That's how we had to give haircuts out there. So, yeah. I mean, and there was a lot of fun, funny things that went, I mean, and if you have a sense of humor, you create a sense of humor. There's a lot of funny things that went down. As a matter of fact, I think they became more funny because you're under such stress every day. But I remember, it's at Phu Bai. On my way, my friend Johnny Rivers told me, he lost his weapon and he lost all his equipment because he had to jump, couldn't jump off the plane or couldn't get off the plane. And I'm in an outhouse, and I read something this guy wrote on there. This is my last day in this blanking hell. And I'm thinking, oh shit, this is my first couple of days here. My God. And of course, and it was like, I feel lucky that I didn't have any time to sit back and say, oh man, this sucks. This is awful. Because every day was rock and roll. Nighttime, there was a lot of fireworks, all kinds of, flares being dropped and puff coming over. We used to call them puff. I don't know what they call them later.
That's what they call them, puff.
The
miniguns.
Yeah, the miniguns. It was like, And those were every 6th round that was coming out of them, and it looked like one solid round of,
Yeah.
and just the sound from them and everything. But I was exposed to Agent Orange, because at nighttime, you know, it was so hot, I'd run around naked. We had a luxury toilet. We had a barrel half with a 2x4. So you can actually sit and go to the bathroom. A lot of guys didn't even have the 2x4. I mean, that's how tough it was to get stuff. And I remember, you know, hearing a plane flying over, and I was smelling stuff like apple blossoms. You know, I got completely saturated, sprayed with Agent Orange. And I was treated in the field, but I didn't tie it in. We didn't know anything about Agent Orange. I didn't realize that I was exposed to Agent Orange until I ran the veterans program at Mount McGregor. We had specialists come up, Agent Orange exposure for the inmates, not for the staff. So.
A friend of mine was over there for a year, and he said it was just like being in Hawaii on the beach for 11 months. But then that Tet Offensive hit, and they paid for it all that month.
Yes.
Several years after he came home, his hair started falling out, and they wouldn't admit it, but he was laying it to the Agent Orange. So he had after effects, but apparently you didn't have any.
I did. I had these craters. You know, I erupted in these giant craters all over my body,
Okay.
and I was kind of like, I don't know if it was coincidentally, I was kind of woozy.
That was when you were over there?
Yes, when I was at Caisson itself, and yeah, when I was out doing the, you know, my nature call and stark naked and completely covered, and I was completely, you know, it was all oozy, you know, craters like yellowish, clear yellowish stuff coming out of them, and they treated me in the field for it. But again, nothing was said about that, and there was no real push for Agent Orange until maybe 10, 20 years ago. But when I was running the program is when they were coming up, and I remember her name, Rosemary Duncan. She was a really, really knowledgeable person. I said, Rosemary, I'm going to have, if I tell you what happened to me, can you tell me if this was a classic symptom of anything? And she goes, yes. And I said, I told her about being sprayed, and I told her about the lesions all over me. She goes, yes, it's classic Agent Orange. But again, I have nothing, you know, maybe a little mental issue, but nothing other than that, I should be okay. I figured at age 63, if I don't have it by now. But there was one thing, they did scare me about 10 years ago, sharp. They called me down and said, if you were transfused, you're still not out of the woods for hepatitis, tuberculosis, one, you know, because they didn't, and of course I had received, you know, from all that loss of blood, I received a lot of, quite a few units of blood for transfusion. And I remember sitting there thinking, after all these years, I'm still not out of the woods for these diseases. So they ran a test on me, and I was, thank God, clear of all that. So I feel very blessed that I'm a very healthy individual. So,
Good.
that's it.
Well, thank you for your interview.
You're very welcome.